All right, let's pretend. Want to pretend a little bit? Okay. You go to the doctor, okay? You're going to the doctor for a visit. And he's in there, he checks your throat, he checks your ears, he checks your, and then he says, I think we should do an EKG, a cardiogram. So he hooks you all up, gets you all ready. And then he said, wait a minute, I got to look at your toes. And then he walks out of the room. And you're laying there hooked up to these sticky little pads all over. And pretty soon a nurse comes in and says, well, I need to ask you a few questions. Do you know what day it is today? Can you count backwards from 10? And then pretty soon another one comes in and takes your blood pressure and says, okay, we're all done. And you're hooked up to the pads. And you go. Finally, the doctor comes in and he finishes the EKG. It's kind of like having a conversation with somebody. You're just talking, and I say, squirrel. Well, that's, when I first read the portion today, that's kind of how I felt. I thought, oh, goodness sakes. He always gives me the hard ones. So let's and I won't ask you to raise your hands, but I hope that some of you, most of you, read the portion and gleaned something out of it. I want you to listen because there's going to be a couple words that are going to come up again and again and again, and hopefully when we're done, you'll see how it all ties together. So first of all, we continue what Rabbi said last week. We're counting. This time it's the Levi'im who are told how many, counted, and then told what they're going to do in the tabernacle, their jobs. That was a big job, but there were thousands of them, so it was okay. So then he goes on, the next little segment goes on to say, and anybody who's contaminated or unclean has to leave the camp. Well, then it jumps to, well, and if you steal or do wrong against another person, mainly stealing, how do you make restitution? And then it jumps on to the sotah, the wayward wife. So if Larry, if somebody tells you that Jean was seen in the company there of let's say, maybe a Mr. Ash over there, and then you get a spirit of jealousy, and then she has to go, shame on her, right? She has to go before the priest, and then there's a whole litany of things she has to do, and if she's okay, then it's okay, but he just doesn't get punished. That's another drash, some other time. But if she is not clean, it's horrid. Anyway, but so we go from there. Then we go on to the Nazir and the rules for taking that vow and what happens if you become unclean during that vow period. You have to start it all over. And then he jumps on to the Aaronic blessing, putting his name on the people of Israel. Then he goes on to the consecration of the utensils in the tabernacle, and then lists by tribe what each tribe has to bring in offerings and sacrifices to dedicate, consecrate, and cleanse the altar. Well, that's a lot of stuff in that portion. Okay, so do all these things fit together? What do you think God's trying to tell you here? Tell us. Now, you go to the Haftarah, and it only contains the part of the Sidra that has to do with the Nazir. So that must be important. Kids, do you remember the story of Samson? What do you know about Samson? Anything? Anybody know anything about Samson? What do you know about Samson? What do you know? Tell me. He was super strong. Why was he super strong? He was super strong. Why was he super strong? Because he didn't cut his hair until some woman cut his hair. That's another drash for another day. Okay, so what was happening back before the Nazir portion in Numbers? What was right before the Nazir portion? Were you listening? What happened right before it is a story of immorality. Okay, with the sotah, the wayward wife. Okay, so now what was it like in the time of Samson? What was going on there? Who were they under the control of at that point? The Philistines. Okay, and what kind of people were they? They weren't very good people. They were immoral people also, kind of like what's going on today. But that's another drash some other time. Yeah. Well, I didn't read the portion. Okay, going back to Numbers then, let's look specifically at immorality among fellow believers. Now, the sages say that anyone who witnesses immorality should strive to become closer to God. And being a Nazir is one way you can do that because you are very disciplined and have very strict rules. So, but what about us? I mean, do you know anybody has taken the vow of a Nazir? In my period in time as a Messianic, I only know one. So we don't do that very often. So now, how do we keep from becoming contaminated or unclean? Well, what did our portion in, and I'm going to call it the Brit Chadashah just because that means new every morning. There's something, every time you read the New Testament, you should find something new, brand new that you never saw before. And that's why I call it that. Anyway, so Danny, if you just put up Galatians 6:1, and let's read that again. Read it with me. Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught doing something wrong, you who are directed by the Ruach, restore such a person in a spirit of gentleness, looking closely at yourself so you are not tempted also. Unfortunately, today, most of us are afraid to say anything because we might offend somebody. Yeah, so we don't say anything. So does that make us a party to sin and uncleanness? Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. And the Parasha today ends with Numbers 7:8. Danny, can you put that up? No, maybe it's not. Yeah, okay. No, keep going. It's the last part. It's the last verse of the portion. It's not. That's not it. I don't have it in front of me. But what it says is Moses, after this was all done, remember we went through all these things to cleanse, to consecrate, to dedicate. Moses now goes into the Holy of, okay. So Moses took, no, that's not it either. So Moses goes into the Holy of Holies, and God speaks to him from above the ark cover. After all this was done. So do you think perhaps that God doesn't speak to us like he used to back then because of maybe our uncleanness? Maybe we aren't, as Rabbi prayed this morning, maybe we're not following the commands, we're not obeying the covenants. God, forgive us for being complacent and for being unclean and not looking at immorality the way we should, the way the world is going right now. So please remember, if you are unclean and you see someone in our fellowship, gently remind them, this is not what we